My wife Becky emptied our $50,000 joint account and divorced me by email while I was deployed overseas. She moved her boyfriend Jeremy into our home thinking I was just another helpless soldier stuck in Afghanistan. But what this cheating wife didn't know was that I'm Jake Miller, military intelligence specialist who'd been tracking financial crimes for the Pentagon. The FBI crashed through her door 6 months later. Agents cuffed Jeremy while Becky stood pale and broken on our lawn, watching her world collapse. She'd thought divorcing a deployed soldier would be easy money, but she didn't know was that her boyfriend Jeremy had been using my stolen money to fund a drug operation. And I, as a helpless soldier she'd betrayed, had been feeding her financial crimes directly to federal investigators. I recalled reading the email twice, the words blurring. Then a strange calm descended. I closed the laptop, showered in the communal stall, the lukewarm water doing nothing to wash away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I dressed for my shift, said nothing to anyone. The guys in my unit, they knew. They saw it in my eyes, the subtle shift in my posture. Wilson, my bunkmate, a good man, had asked if I was good. I'd grunted yeah, just some stuff back home, I'd muttered. He'd nodded, leaving it at that. We unspokenly understood the burdens we all carried from worlds away. That night back in my bunk, the silence of the barracks pressing in, I'd replied to Becky's email. One word. Understood. No arguments, no begging, no threats. What was the point? She'd made her decision. But as I typed that single loaded word, a different kind of resolve began to solidify within me. She thought this was an easy out, a clean break while I was helpless on the other side of the world. She underestimated me. She always had. The truth was, I wasn't entirely surprised. The months leading up to deployment had been different. Becky had grown distant. The small intimacies, the shared jokes, the questions about my day, they'd all evaporated. She'd started working late at the dental office where she was an administrator, she'd claimed. Joined a gym 3 times a week, she'd announced, though she never seemed to break a sweat. New clothes appeared in her closet, tags still on. New friends I'd never met. New passwords on her phone, her laptop. I hadn't confronted her. That wasn't my way. My father, a man of few words but immense wisdom, had taught me to observe, to gather facts, to act with precision, not passion. But I wasn't blind, so I'd made quiet preparations. Nothing dramatic, just contingencies. I'd secured important documents, my birth certificate, our marriage license, ironic that, the house deed which, thanks to my VA loan, was solely in my name, though I'd foolishly added hers later, in a new secure storage unit across town. My grandfather's watch, my mother's silver, things that mattered, things she wouldn't appreciate or probably even notice were gone. I'd also opened a separate bank account, diverting a small, unnoticeable portion of my pay there each month, enough that I wouldn't be starting from absolute zero if the storm I sensed brewing finally broke. The night before I deployed, her hug at the airport felt rehearsed, her eyes were dry. "Stay safe, okay?" she'd murmured, her voice devoid of the emotion I'd once cherished. It was the perfunctory farewell one might offer a departing coworker, not a husband heading into a war zone. I should have known then, definitively, but a sliver of hope, that stubborn, foolish soldier in me, clung to the possibility that I was wrong. I wasn't. What Becky didn't know, as she crafted her "Let's be adults" email, was that I'd already anticipated this. What she didn't understand was that I never start fights, but I always finish them. As I stared at the grainy image of her face, contorted in shock on my laptop screen 6 months later, watching the FBI dismantle her new life, I didn't feel the raw anger of that initial discovery. Instead, there was a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. This was about deceit, theft, and a profound betrayal that cut deeper than any enemy bullet could. Before shutting down the live feed that day of the raid, before the memories of Kandahar and that damn email fully resurfaced, I remembered the first crucial call I'd made from that dusty fob. Not to a lawyer, not yet, but to someone far more suited to the task at hand. My phone had felt heavy in my hand. I'd scrolled to a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't called in years. He'd answered on the second ring, his voice a low growl I remembered from darker, more dangerous times. "Jake," I'd said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "It's Jake." There was a pause, then a knowing sigh from his end. He asked what was wrong. I told him Becky left, took everything, shacked up with some guy in my house. He'd just listened. When I was done, he asked what I wanted him to do. I took a deep breath, the desert dust scratching my throat. "It's time, Jake," I'd stated. Phase 1. Let's gather intelligence. I want to know everything about this Jeremy, and I want to know what she's really been up to. Jake had simply replied, "Consider it done, brother. You just focus on staying alive. I'll handle the home front." And he had. Oh, he had. The scene unfolding on my laptop now was testament to that. This was just the beginning of Becky understanding how badly she'd miscalculated. Jake. The name itself felt like a weapon. Jacob Jake Riley. We'd been through hell and back together in places that didn't officially exist on any map. Delta. He was sharper than a razor, with an instinct for trouble and a moral compass that, while not always pointing true north by civilian standards, was fiercely loyal to those he considered his own. He'd saved my life once, a messy extraction in the Hindu Kush where everything went sideways. I owed him. He'd said I owed him nothing, that we were brothers, but the debt remained, an unspoken bond. After he'd left the service, Jake had put his unique skill set to use as a private investigator. The kind who didn't advertise, the kind you found only through whispers and trusted contacts. He specialized in finding things people didn't want found and uncovering truths buried deep. 0705. Over a series of encrypted calls from Kandahar, I'd laid it all out for him. The email, Becky's sudden transformation, the missing money I was already starting to notice, Jeremy. I'd given him Becky's details, the address of my house, everything I knew. "Find out who this Jeremy really is," I'd instructed. "I want to know his shoe size, his favorite cereal, every skeleton in his closet. And watch Becky. I need to understand what I'm dealing with." Jake was a ghost. Within days, information started trickling in. Jeremy Rourke, he'd informed me, was 35, no steady job, a string of short-lived relationships, mostly with women who seemed to be recently separated or widowed, a charmer, a leech. He had a couple of DUIs, a suspended license, and a minor fraud charge from a few years back that had been pleaded down. Nothing major league, Jake had assessed, but a definite pattern of opportunism, a bottom feeder. The anger had simmered in me, hot and potent. My wife, the woman I'd shared my life with, had traded me for this? Then came the gut punch from my bank, another notification, another large withdrawal from the joint account, $8,500. I'd checked the balance immediately, $22.37. Our savings, over $47,000 we'd painstakingly built, gone. Transferred to an account I didn't recognize. I'd called the bank, the international connection crackling. The customer service rep, a hesitant young woman, confirmed my worst fears. Becky had initiated a series of transfers, starting small the day after I deployed, then escalating. She'd cleaned us out. I'd relayed this to Jake, my voice tight with a fury I was struggling to control. He'd listened, his silence more comforting than any platitude. A few days later, an encrypted image file arrived from him. I opened it, my blood running cold. It was a photo taken from a distance, but unmistakably clear. Jeremy, grinning like he'd won the lottery, was behind the wheel of my Ford F-150, the one I'd babied for years. He was wearing my favorite Seahawks sweatshirt, the one Becky had given me for Christmas. And in the passenger seat, laughing, her head thrown back, was Becky. She looked happier than I'd seen her in years. That photo, it was more than just a betrayal. It was a desecration of my life, my identity. They weren't just stealing my money, my house. They were stealing my memories, my very essence. I'd stared at it for a long time, the faces burning into my retinas. Then I'd called Jake. "Find everything," I'd rasped, my voice raw. "Every dirty secret, every misstep." I want to burn them with the truth, Jake. I want them to understand what they've done." Jake's reply was low and steady. He affirmed he was on it, that they wouldn't know what hit them. He'd added that he was already looking into the house, how Jeremy got his name on anything if he had. He suspected something wasn't right with how quickly Jeremy had entrenched himself. That night I didn't sleep. The image of Becky's smiling face next to that parasite was seared into my mind. The cold resolve I'd felt earlier now had a razor edge. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was about justice, and Jake was the perfect instrument to help me deliver it. He was my silent partner, my eyes and ears on the ground, and his next update would prove to be the catalyst for my return. The call from Jake that expedited my return came 2 weeks later. He sounded grim. "Nate," he'd started, no preamble. "You need to see this." He'd sent another encrypted file. It was a scanned document, a home equity line of credit application for $50,000 against my house. My signature was on it, a clumsy, almost passable forgery, and next to it, clear as day, was Becky's legitimate signature, co-applicant Jeremy Rourke. My stomach twisted. She hadn't just left me and stolen our savings. She was actively trying to saddle me with debt, to bleed me dry using my own home as collateral. That forgery, Jake had explained, was fresh. They'd applied just last week. The bank was processing it. That was it, the final straw. I couldn't fight this effectively from halfway across the world. I spoke to my CEO, Master Sergeant Henderson, a man who'd seen his share of soldiers' lives unravel back home. I explained briefly the situation: marital breakdown, financial fraud, the urgency. He'd listened, his expression unreadable, then nodded. He said he'd see what he could do about compassionate leave, or at least an early return rotation. He told me to keep my head in the game until then. Easier said than done. 3 weeks later, I was on a C-17 heading stateside. I didn't tell Becky I was coming. No calls, no texts. The element of surprise was crucial now. I landed at SeaTac, then took a connecting flight to Spokane, the city I'd once called home. It felt alien, tainted. I checked into a nondescript motel near the airport, using a prepaid burner phone and a variation of my name Jake had suggested. My first call was to Jake. He met me an hour later, not at the motel, but at a noisy, rundown diner off the interstate, the kind of place where no one looked twice. Jake hadn't changed much. Leaner, maybe, his eyes holding that same wary intensity I remembered. He slid a thick manila envelope across the chipped Formica table. "You look like hell, Nate," he'd observed, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "I feel like it," I'd admitted, grabbing the envelope. Inside was a meticulously organized dossier, surveillance photos of Becky and Jeremy, coming and going from my house, shopping, eating out, living my life, financial printouts, details on Jeremy's past cons, and front and center, a clearer copy of that forged HELOC application. He'd pointed to Jeremy's section on the application. "This guy isn't just a freeloader, Nate," Jake had explained, his voice low. "He's a predator. He targets women in vulnerable situations. Deployed spouses, recent divorcees. I found 3 other cases, similar MO. Gets in, bleeds them dry, moves on. Becky. She's either his latest mark or she's in on it with him." I'd felt a wave of nausea. "She didn't just leave me," I'd stated, the words like ash in my mouth. "She tried to rob me blind, to destroy me financially." "And she's not his first," Jake had reiterated grimly. "We need to stop him, Nate, for good, not just for you." His words resonated. This was bigger than my personal pain. There were other victims, other soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, whose lives this scum was potentially ruining. My resolve hardened further. We spent hours in that diner, Jake outlining what he'd found, me absorbing the sickening details. He discovered that Jeremy, despite his suspended license, was still driving my truck brazenly. He'd also learned that Jeremy had been making inquiries with a notoriously shady real estate agent, known for quick, under-the-table cash sales of properties. "They're trying to unload your house, Nate," Jake had warned. "Fast. The audacity of it was breathtaking. My house, my truck, my money, my signature. That afternoon, Jake provided a simple disguise, a baseball cap, sunglasses, a nondescript jacket. I needed to confirm the forgery in person to set the official wheels of justice in motion. I drove to my bank, the one where I'd had an account since I first enlisted. I asked for Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, a man I'd dealt with for years who knew my face, my real signature. I sat across from Henderson in his glass-walled office, the HELOC application Jake had procured lying between us. I'd slid my military ID and driver's license across the desk. "Mr. Henderson," I'd begun, my voice steady, "I believe my signature has been forged on this application." He'd picked up the document, his eyes scanning it, then looking at my IDs, then back at the forgery. His jovial demeanor vanished. The color drained from his face. He'd looked up at me, his expression a mixture of shock and concern. "Staff Sergeant Miller," he'd stammered, This is a serious allegation. This is a federal offense." I'd met his gaze, my own hard as steel. "I know," I'd replied, my voice devoid of any warmth. "And I want to press charges. I want whoever did this prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." The air in the office crackled with tension. Henderson nodded slowly. He said he would have to escalate this immediately to their fraud department and the authorities. That, I'd told him, was exactly what I wanted. The first shot had been fired. Becky and Jeremy had no idea what was coming. The bank moved faster than I'd anticipated. Within 24 hours, Henderson called me on my burner phone. He informed me they'd frozen the HELOC. The funds hadn't been dispersed yet. A small victory, but a crucial one. He also confirmed they'd initiated a formal fraud investigation and notified the authorities, as per my request. The net was beginning to tighten. Predictably, panic erupted on their end. That evening, my burner phone buzzed. A text from Becky's number. "Jake, what have you done? The bank called about the HELOC. They said there's a fraud alert. You need to fix this." I'd read the message, a bitter smile touching my lips. The sheer nerve of her. "You need to fix this." I'd ignored it, let her sweat. Jake, meanwhile, wasn't idle. He'd been tailing Jeremy, knowing his habits, his routine driving my truck. 2 days later, Jake called, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. He told me Jeremy got himself pulled over. He'd run a red light, apparently. With his suspended license, that was an automatic arrest. But it got better, or worse, depending on your perspective. The arresting officers, doing a routine inventory search of my impounded truck before it was towed, had found something interesting tucked under the passenger seat, a manila envelope. Inside, several pre-signed prescription pads from the dental office where Becky worked, and not just blank pads. Some had already been filled out for controlled substances. My blood ran cold. Was Becky involved in this too? Or was Jeremy setting her up or using her access? Jake had said the police were very interested in that find. He'd also mentioned that he might have given the local PD a friendly tip about a Ford F-150, matching my truck's description, being driven erratically by a man fitting Jeremy's description, possibly under the influence in that specific area, a concerned citizen report, he'd called it. I didn't ask for details. Later that night, Becky called, her voice hysterical, sobbing down the line. "Jake, please, you have to help," she'd wailed. "They arrested Jeremy. They found some prescription pads in your truck. Your truck, Jake. They're saying they were stolen from my office. I don't know how they got there. You have to tell them Jeremy wouldn't do that it's a mistake." I'd let her ramble, her panic a pathetic symphony to my ears. When she finally paused for breath, my voice was ice. "My truck, Becky," I'd questioned silkily. "The one he was driving? The one you so generously let him use after you threw me out and cleaned out my accounts? Why on earth would I help him? Or you, for that matter?" I'd asked her whose signature was on those prescriptions if she knew. She'd started to stammer, to deny, but the fear in her voice was palpable. I'd hung up. The prescription pad discovery added a new, dangerous dimension. This wasn't just about financial fraud anymore. This was potentially drug offenses, a federal crime that carried serious prison time. Jake and I met again, this time in my sterile motel room. He laid out the new intelligence. The real estate agent Jeremy had been meeting was a man named Daniel Spencer. Spencer, Jake had discovered, had a reputation for handling quick lowball cash sales, often for clients in messy legal situations. He was a shark who smelled blood in the water, and he and Jeremy had been seen together multiple times, looking at my house, taking measurements. Jake had managed to get close during one of their more recent meetings at a coffee shop near my neighborhood, using a directional microphone. He'd played the recording for me. Spencer's voice was slick, confident. "We'll list it low, 40% under market," he'd told Jeremy. "Get a cash buyer in within the week. You'll both be cashed out, untraceable, before her husband even gets his boots back on American soil, assuming he hasn't already figured out the HELOC." Jeremy had apparently laughed, asking how Spencer was so sure. Spencer had replied that military divorces were messy. Husbands were usually too busy or too far away to fight properly. They'd take a quick settlement. "It's a proven model," he'd boasted. The recording ended there. A proven model. My fists clenched. They weren't just opportunistic thieves. They were part of a predatory system. This Daniel Spencer was a key player. The forgery, the emptied accounts, the attempt to sell my house from under me, possibly even the prescription drugs. It was all connected. This was a conspiracy, and Becky was either a willing participant or a catastrophically naive pawn. At that point, it barely mattered to me which. They were trying to erase me, and I was about to show them just how resilient a well-prepared soldier could be. The game, I realized, had just been elevated to a whole new level, and we now had a name, a new target: Daniel Spencer. Jake had grinned then, a predatory glint in his eyes. He suggested it was time we brought in the big guns, legally speaking. He knew a lawyer, he'd said, a bulldog named James Rhino Reinhardt, who specialized in complex fraud and had a particular dislike for con artists who preyed on service members. It was time to go on the offensive, full force. Jake's contact, James Rhino Reinhardt, was exactly as advertised. A sharp, unyielding lawyer who radiated an almost palpable aggression towards fraudsters. We met him in his downtown Spokane office, a space that screamed quiet competence rather than flashy opulence. I laid out everything: Becky's email, the emptied accounts, Jake's surveillance, the forged HELOC, Jeremy's arrest, the stolen prescription pads, and the damning recording of Daniel Spencer. Rhino listened intently, his eyes narrowed, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. He asked pointed questions, his mind clearly cataloging every detail, every potential legal angle. When I finished, Rhino leaned back in his chair, a grim smile on his face. "Gentlemen," he'd declared, his voice a low rumble, "what you have here isn't just a messy divorce. This is a multi-layered criminal enterprise. Conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, and potentially drug trafficking if those prescriptions are linked. Spencer," he'd continued, tapping the transcript of Jake's recording, "is a known quantity. We've had our eye on him. He's suspected of laundering money through undervalued real estate deals, often targeting vulnerable individuals, including military families. Your evidence, Sergeant Miller, particularly Jake's surveillance and that recording, might be the linchpin we need to connect him to a wider network." Rhino explained that he'd already been working discreetly with federal authorities on similar cases. The FBI had an active investigation into Spencer and his associates. Our information, he'd asserted, could blow the case wide open. He proposed a meeting with the FBI to present our findings and coordinate efforts. I agreed immediately. This was bigger than me now. It was about stopping these predators from harming anyone else. The meeting with FBI agents Patel and Donovan was professional and direct. They were impressed with the thoroughness of Jake's investigation and the clarity of our evidence. Agent Patel confirmed that Spencer was a major person of interest in a multi-state operation, defrauding military personnel whose spouses were deployed. My case, she'd explained, with the forgery and the attempted HELOC while I was verifiably in a combat zone, provided a clear, egregious example of their MO. They were particularly interested in the speed with which Jeremy had moved in and the subsequent financial maneuvers. The feds wanted to catch Spencer and Jeremy in the act of finalizing the fraudulent sale of my house. Rhino suggested a controlled sting. We needed them to feel secure to proceed with their plan. Jake mentioned the security cameras I'd installed years ago, the ones Becky had probably forgotten about or assumed were disconnected. They uploaded to a cloud server I could access remotely. Perfect, Agent Donovan had said. We can monitor them in real time. The plan was set. We needed a catalyst to push Jeremy and Spencer to act quickly. Rhino, through back channels, let it be known that Staff Sergeant Miller was back in town and asking a lot of uncomfortable questions. The bait was laid. Meanwhile, Becky, increasingly desperate as the HELOC remained frozen and Jeremy's legal troubles mounted with the drug implication, started texting me incessantly, begging to meet, to explain everything. Her messages were a cocktail of feigned innocence, accusations, and pleas for mercy. I agreed to meet her, or rather, I let her think I would. I told her to meet me at Riverfront Park, a public place, at 2 p.m. on Thursday. I had no intention of going. It was a diversion. While she would be waiting for me, looking over her shoulder, Jeremy and Spencer, feeling the heat and believing I was occupied, were expected to make their move on the house. Jake had subtly encouraged this urgency through a carefully placed rumor via one of Spencer's less discreet associates, hinting that I was about to file liens that would tie up the property indefinitely. Thursday arrived, a crisp autumn day. As Becky made her way to the park, I was with Jake and Rhino in an unmarked van a block away from my house, watching a live feed from my internal security cameras on a laptop. Agents Patel and Donovan were in another vehicle, coordinating with their takedown team, strategically positioned around the neighborhood. Right on schedule at 1:30 p.m., Spencer's car pulled up to my house. Jeremy, looking nervous but greedy, came out to meet him. They went inside. My cameras caught everything. Spencer, bold as brass, walking through my living room, discussing listing prices with Jeremy. Spencer could be heard clearly on the audio feed telling Jeremy that he had a cash buyer lined up, a quick sale, no inspections. He assured Jeremy they could close in 3 days, wire the money to an offshore account, and the wife's angry husband will be left holding an empty bag. Jeremy had asked about Becky. Spencer had waved a dismissive hand, saying she was either in on it or too scared to talk. He'd added that they'd give her a small cut to keep her quiet if necessary. That was all the FBI needed. Agent Patel's voice crackled over Jake's radio. "We have clear intent and conspiracy. All units, execute." Within seconds, the quiet suburban street erupted. FBI vehicles converged on my house, sirens suddenly wailing. From the van, we watched as agents stormed the property. The camera feed inside showed Jeremy and Spencer's faces freeze in comical terror as the door burst open. "FBI, hands up!" The climax I'd envisioned that first day, seeing those flashing lights on my laptop in that dingy motel, was now playing out in real time, but it was so much more potent. Just then, my burner phone rang. It was Agent Patel. "Mr. Miller," she'd stated calmly, "we have Spencer and Rourke in custody. They were discussing the fraudulent sale with documents laid out. We also have your wife, Becky. She received a call about the raid, presumably from a neighbor, and raced over. She's arrived at the scene. She appears distressed." I looked towards the house. Sure enough, there was Becky standing on the sidewalk watching her world crumble, the flashing lights illuminating her tear-streaked, bewildered face. This was it. The trap had sprung. The arrests of Jeremy Rourke and Daniel Spencer sent shockwaves through their network. The FBI, armed with the evidence from my house, including documents Spencer had brought for Jeremy to sign, quickly unraveled a sophisticated multi-state fraud ring. They'd been targeting military families for years, exploiting deployments and marital discord to fraudulently acquire properties and assets. My case, Agent Patel later told me, was the key that unlocked numerous other investigations. Jeremy, facing a mountain of evidence, the forgery, conspiracy charges, the stolen prescription pads, which forensics tied to his fingerprints, not Becky's, though her negligence in securing them was noted, and the damning recordings, quickly folded. He agreed to cooperate, implicating Spencer as the mastermind and detailing several other fraudulent transactions they'd conducted. Spencer, ever the arrogant professional, initially tried to bluster his way out, but the weight of evidence, including testimony from other victims Jake and the FBI had subsequently identified, was overwhelming. He too eventually sought a plea deal, and Becky, she was questioned extensively. Initially, she'd tried to play the innocent victim, claiming Jeremy had manipulated her, that she knew nothing about the broader schemes, that she'd forged my signature on the HELOC under duress because Jeremy had convinced her I was hiding assets and planning to leave her destitute. She'd cried, she'd pleaded, she'd professed her undying, if misguided, love for me. Agents Patel and Donovan, seasoned investigators, had seen it all before. They'd listened patiently, then calmly presented her with the evidence of her complicity. Her signature on the HELOC next to the forgery, the timeline of the bank account draining which began the day after I deployed, her text to Jeremy discussing their money. Rhino, my lawyer, met with Becky and her hastily appointed public defender. He laid out my terms, cold and non-negotiable. I wasn't interested in seeing her imprisoned alongside Jeremy and Spencer, though her actions arguably warranted it. My revenge was more precise. I wanted full restitution of every cent stolen from our joint accounts and any funds she'd personally benefited from via Jeremy. I wanted her to sign a legally binding confession to the forgery of my signature on the HELOC application. I wanted her to relinquish any and all claims to the house, my military pension, and any other marital assets. In exchange, I would not pursue separate civil or criminal charges against her for the forgery and theft, leaving her fate regarding any peripheral involvement in the larger conspiracy to the federal prosecutors, who, Rhino hinted, might be lenient, if she cooperated fully against Spencer and wasn't a primary target. I remembered the meeting where her lawyer conveyed my terms. Becky, according to Rhino, had sat there, stunned into silence. The fight had visibly drained out of her. The realization that she was utterly cornered, that her attempts at manipulation had failed, finally dawned. She'd looked at the documents, her hand trembling. Her lawyer had advised her it was the best deal she was going to get, given the circumstances. She'd signed everything. I saw her one last time during a supervised meeting to sign the final divorce papers a few months later. She looked older, worn down. She'd tried to speak to me, her eyes pleading. "Jake, I never meant for it to get this out of control," she'd whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry for the pain I caused you." I'd looked at her, the woman I had once promised to love, honor, and cherish. There was no anger left, just a vast, cold emptiness where my love for her used to reside. I didn't respond to her apology. There was nothing to say that could undo the betrayal, nothing that could bridge the chasm she had created between us. I just signed my name on the divorce decree, the ink a final, definitive end to our 13 years. Rhino had nodded curtly, gathered the papers, and we'd walked out, leaving her sitting alone at the table. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, a local news channel ran a segment. It detailed the takedown of a significant financial fraud ring that had preyed on military families across 3 states. They mentioned the pivotal role of an unnamed staff sergeant whose vigilance and cooperation had been instrumental. They showed blurred images of Spencer and Jeremy being led away in handcuffs. Jake had been with me when it aired, and he'd clapped me on the shoulder. "We got him, Nate," he'd said, a rare smile on his face. "Not just for you. We got him for all the others they screwed over, too." And in that moment, watching the news report, I felt a profound sense of justice, a reckoning that went far beyond my personal grievance. It wasn't just revenge, it was a restoration of order, a small blow struck against those who prey on the vulnerable. The system for once had worked. The wheels of justice ground on. Jeremy Rourke was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Daniel Spencer, the architect of the scheme, received 12 years, his network dismantled. The stolen prescription pads added a drug-related charge for Jeremy, though Becky, due to her cooperation and the focus on the larger financial crimes, received probation for her minor role in that aspect, contingent on her testimony and continued restitution payments from her meager earnings. The financial restitution she owed me was substantial. She'd be paying it off for years. The divorce was clean, relatively speaking, after her capitulation. I got the house, free and clear, though it felt tainted, haunted by memories I wanted to erase. I sold it within a few months, taking a slight loss just to be rid of it quickly. The proceeds, combined with the funds I'd carefully squirreled away and what little Jake had managed to recover before it was all spent by Becky and Jeremy, gave me a fresh start. I decided it was time for a change. 20 years in the Army, 4 deployments, I'd given enough. I took early retirement, my pension providing a steady, if modest, income. The betrayal had taken its toll, not just on my marriage, but on my faith in people, in institutions. I needed peace, solitude. I found it in Montana, buying a small rustic cabin on 10 acres of wooded land outside Missoula. 2 bedrooms, a workshop, a creek murmuring nearby. No close neighbors for miles, just me and the wilderness. I got a dog, a loyal German shepherd I named Scout. He became my constant companion. I started doing carpentry work, small jobs for locals, fixing fences, building decks, crafting custom furniture. Simple, honest work that kept my hands busy and my mind occupied. It didn't pay much, but combined with my pension, it was enough. Sometimes in the quiet of the evenings, sitting on my porch with Scout at my feet, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, I'd think about Becky. I'd heard through Rhino that she'd moved back to her hometown in Oregon, was working as a receptionist again, trying to rebuild her shattered life. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate was too strong an emotion, too consuming. What I felt was a profound indifference, a sense of a chapter irrevocably closed. She'd made her choices and I'd made mine. We were strangers now, linked only by a past that felt like it belonged to 2 different people. Jake and I stayed in touch. He'd call occasionally, checking in, sharing stories of new cases, new scumbags he was bringing to justice. He was thriving, his unique talents more in demand than ever. He'd visit sometimes and we'd spend a few days fishing or hiking, the easy camaraderie of old soldiers falling back into place. One crisp fall afternoon, about a year after I'd settled in Montana, I received a letter. It was forwarded from my old Spokane address. The return address was Fort Worth, Texas. I didn't recognize the name. I opened it, curious. It was from a woman, a Navy wife. Her husband had been deployed on a carrier when Jeremy Rourke and a local associate of Spencer's had tried to run a similar property fraud scheme on her. She wrote that the FBI, during their victim outreach after the arrests, had mentioned my case, explaining how my actions had helped expose the wider conspiracy and prevent other families from being targeted. "You don't know me, Staff Sergeant Miller," she'd written, her handwriting neat and precise, "but you saved our home, possibly our marriage. We were on the verge of losing everything. Thank you. Thank you for fighting back when it would have been easier to just walk away, to focus only on your own loss. You gave us a chance to recover and you helped bring those monsters to justice." I read the letter twice, a lump forming in my throat. I pinned it to the old wooden door of my cabin next to a faded photo of my parents. Some days when the Montana silence felt too vast or a stray memory of Becky's betrayal tried to claw its way back, I'd look at that letter. It was a reminder that even in the ashes of profound personal loss, something good could emerge. That one man pushed too far could indeed make a difference. My revenge hadn't just been for me. It had, in some small way, helped restore a little bit of faith and fairness in a world that often seemed to lack both. And as I looked out at the towering pines, Scout thumping his tail contentedly beside me, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I was building something new, something strong, something that was entirely unequivocally mine.